This story is titled, I Canceled My Wedding and Uninvited My Ex-Fiancée from Her Once-in-a-Lifetime Dream Vacation After Finding Out She Cheated on Me. When my ex found out, she flipped out, calling me an asshole for doing this to her with her friends, telling me to go off myself. But now, the truth comes out. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be one of those people pouring their drama online, but I feel like I just need to vent. Maybe it's because everything that happened is still so fresh in my head, and I can't stop replaying it over and over. So here we are. I don't expect sympathy or validation, but if someone out there can relate or even get a laugh out of how spectacularly this whole thing imploded, then cool. I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm a 26-year-old guy, ex-military, now working a pretty solid job that sometimes requires me to travel. Nothing crazy, but I'm gone for a week or so, maybe once or twice a month. I'd been with my ex-fiancée, let's call her Sarah, 24, for about 3 years. When we started dating, everything was great. You know that feeling when you meet someone and you're like, damn, this is it. That's how I felt about her. Sarah was sweet, funny, and ambitious in her own way. She worked a decent job and had big plans for her future. Honestly, I thought we were the dream team kind of couple. My friends liked her, my family loved her, and I was proud to call her my girl. Marriage felt like the natural next step. So last year, I proposed to her. Nothing crazy, just me, her, and a nice dinner followed by a walk under the stars where I got down on one knee. She cried, said yes, and it was probably one of the happiest days of my life. From then on, I was all in. I worked extra hours, saved up, and started planning a wedding that I hoped she would remember forever. I'm not rich, but I'm careful with my money. I budgeted every detail, from the venue to the food to the decorations. Sarah was all about it. She loved wedding planning, spending hours looking at Pinterest boards, researching dresses, and planning our perfect day. But the thing she was most excited about? The honeymoon. For as long as I'd known Sarah, she'd talked about this one country she'd always dreamed of visiting. I won't say the exact place because I want to stay anonymous, but it's one of those stunning, exotic destinations that shows up on travel magazines and top 10 bucket list trips articles. She always called it her once-in-a-lifetime trip, so I made it happen. I booked a 10-day honeymoon with 5-star hotels, excursions, and everything she dreamed of. It cost me a lot, close to $7,000 just for the trip, but I wanted it to be perfect for her. She cried when I showed her the booking details, and seeing her that happy made me feel like all the hard work was worth it. Fast forward to about a week ago. Our wedding was scheduled for the 12th, and I was feeling nervous, but the good kind of nervous. I was excited to marry the woman I loved. Everything seemed like it was coming together. Then, that message came. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I had the day off work to tie up some last-minute details. Sarah was in the shower, and I was sitting at the table going over vendor contracts for the wedding. Her phone, which was charging on the counter, buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't pay attention to her phone. I'm not a jealous guy, and I trusted her. But this time, the screen lit up, and I happened to glance over. The message said, period. Have you told my name about what you did with her ex-boyfriend? If you don't do it tonight, I will tomorrow. I froze. I read it twice, trying to process what I'd just seen. My first thought was, what the hell is this? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the wording made my stomach drop. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't some random message. It felt serious. I picked up the phone and stared at the sender. It was Sarah's sister. Let's call her Emily. Now Emily and I have always gotten along. She's married to my best friend, and she's never been one for drama. For her to send something like that, I knew it wasn't good. When Sarah came out of the bathroom, hair still wet and wrapped in a towel, I confronted her. I tried to play it cool at first. I showed her the message and asked, "What's this about?" Her reaction told me everything. She looked at the phone, then back at me, and her face went pale. She tried to smile and brush it off, saying something like, "Oh, you know Emily. She's always trying to stir up drama. Don't worry about it." But I wasn't letting it go. I said, "Sarah, seriously, what is she talking about?" Her face changed then. She got defensive. She rolled her eyes and said, "Fine, you want the truth? I ran into my ex at the bachelorette party. Nothing happened. Emily's just being a bitch." At that moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the kind of guy who trusts his fiancée and doesn't overthink things. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone was too flippant, too dismissive, so I dropped it for the moment. I didn't want to start a huge fight right then and there, but my gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her phone. I felt sick as I did it, like I was betraying her privacy, but I had to know. I had to know if I was being crazy or if there was something more. And what I found destroyed me. There were texts, hundreds of them, pictures, videos. The messages went back years. They started right around the time we got together, and they kept going. Every single time I'd gone on a work trip, she'd hooked up with her ex. There were messages like, dot. When does he leave again? I miss you. I can't wait to see you tonight. One picture stopped me cold. It was of them in our bed. At that moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. It's like my whole world shifted. Everything I thought I knew about Sarah, about our relationship, was a lie. I sent all the evidence to my phone, put it down, and just sat there in the dark, trying to process what I'd seen. I didn't sleep at all that night. My mind was racing, my heart was pounding. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I sat there watching the sun come up through the window, my mind a complete mess. I hadn't slept at all. The phone with all the evidence was sitting on the table in front of me like some kind of bomb. Every time I even looked at it, I felt sick all over again. Sarah was still asleep in our bed, the same bed where she and her ex had hooked up. The thought made me want to throw up. I had no idea how I'd been so blind, so trusting. I guess I was the idiot who thought love meant loyalty. But the messages, the pictures, I couldn't unsee them. Around 7 a.m., I heard her start to stir. I knew I had to get this over with. I walked into the bedroom, stood at the foot of the bed, and just said, "Wake up." She groaned a little, rolled over, and muttered, "What's wrong?" I held up her phone and said, "We need to talk, now." That got her attention. She sat up, brushing her hair back from her face and squinting at me. "Why are you holding my phone?" I don't know what it was, but her calm, sleepy voice made something snap in me. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just said, "I know everything, Sarah." Her whole face changed. At first, she tried to play dumb. "What are you talking about?" I didn't even bother answering. I unlocked her phone, pulled up one of the messages, one of the more explicit ones, and held it up for her to see. Her face went pale instantly. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at me with wide eyes like a deer in headlights. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked. My voice came out way calmer than I felt. She blinked a few times, then stammered, Where did you get that?" "Your phone," I said. "The one you didn't think I'd ever look at." "So? How long has this been going on?" At this point, her expression shifted from shock to something I can only describe as defensive. She crossed her arms over her chest and mumbled, "It's not what you think." Those words, "not what you think," set me off. I finally lost it. I laughed. Actually laughed. "Not what I think? Really? So all those messages, all those pictures of you with him, those are what, fake?" She started crying then. I don't know if they were real tears or just part of her attempt to manipulate me, but I wasn't falling for it. Between sobs, she said the same bullshit cheaters always say, "It didn't mean anything. I still love you." "You don't get to say that," I shot back. "You've been sleeping with him for years." "Years, Sarah. While I was out working, trying to build a life for us, you were here with him. How can you even look me in the eye and say you love me?" At this point, she started begging. She got off the bed and grabbed my arm. "Please don't do this. We can work through this. It was a mistake, just a stupid mistake." I pulled my arm away from her. "A mistake? A 4-year-long mistake? You've been with him since the beginning of our relationship. Do you have any idea how disgusting this is?" I grabbed her bag from the closet and started throwing her clothes into it. She freaked out, asking me what I was doing, but I didn't answer. I was done. "Where am I supposed to go?" Out of my sight, she wailed. "I don't care," I said, zipping up the bag and shoving it into her hands. "Go to your sister's house. Go to his place. Hell, go sleep in your car for all I care. You're not staying here." She started bawling even harder, but I didn't care. I opened the front door, and she just stood there, crying and looking at me like I was the bad guy. I told her one last time, "Get out, Sarah. It's over." When she realized I wasn't changing my mind, she finally left. She took her bag and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I waited until I heard her car start and pull out of the driveway before I let myself sit down. I was shaking, physically shaking. My whole body felt exhausted, like I'd just run a marathon. I kept thinking, what the hell just happened to my life? After she left, I started going through the motions. I didn't even feel like myself. I called my best friend, who came over immediately. I told him everything, and he just sat there with me in silence for a while. Finally, he said, "Man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." I told him about the wedding, how everything needed to be canceled. He and his wife jumped in to help me. They called vendors, contacted guests, and made sure everyone knew the wedding was off. I didn't want to deal with it myself. Just hearing the words, "the wedding is canceled," made my stomach turn. By the end of the day, I'd spent hours on the phone canceling everything. The venue, the photographer, the DJ. Most of the vendors were sympathetic, though a few gave me grief about deposits and refunds. I didn't even care about the money anymore. I just wanted it all to be over. The worst part, though, was the honeymoon. That damn trip. Ich stuck off. Sarah didn't reach out for the first 24 hours, but I knew it wouldn't last. Sure enough, the next morning, she started texting me. The messages started off soft. Apologies, explanations, promises to make it right. When I ignored her, the tone changed. She started blaming me, saying things like, "If you hadn't been gone so much for work, maybe I wouldn't have needed him." Needed him? Are you kidding me? I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Her family and friends started texting me too. She must have spun some BS story about how I was overreacting, because I was suddenly getting messages saying I was a jerk for canceling the wedding over one little mistake. One little mistake. That's what they called 4 years of lies and betrayal. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't owe any of them an explanation. As far as I was concerned, Sarah and her entire circle could believe whatever they wanted. I knew the truth, and that was enough for me. By the time the dust settled, I was completely drained. My house felt empty, my phone was still blowing up, and my wedding plans were officially dead in the water. But as I sat there that night, I realized something. At least it was over. Sarah was out of my life, and there was no going back. After kicking Sarah out, my house felt eerily quiet. For a place that used to feel like ours, it now felt foreign, like I was living in someone else's home. I spent the next day doing what I guess you'd call damage control. I still had all the wedding decorations shoved in boxes, stacks of RSVP cards that now meant nothing, and a fridge full of food I didn't even want to look at. To distract myself, I started making a list of everything that needed to be canceled or adjusted. It was a brutal process. Each time I had to say, "Yeah, the wedding isn't happening anymore." It was like getting punched in the gut all over again. Most people were understanding, and a few of the smaller vendors even refunded me. Bless them. But others weren't as sympathetic, especially when it came to deposits. I just let it go. At that point, what was a few thousand more dollars lost? The worst part of the whole mess, though, was the honeymoon. I'd spent months planning that trip down to the last detail. I wanted it to be perfect for Sarah. It was supposed to be 10 days of luxury in a country she'd always dreamed of visiting. I'd saved up for it for almost a year, scouring deals to make sure we got the best flights, the nicest hotels, and some once-in-a-lifetime excursions. The whole thing had cost me close to $7,000. And here's the kicker. It was completely non-refundable. That part stung. I was already out 10 grand for the wedding itself, and now I was staring down the barrel of losing another 7 grand for a trip that would never happen. I called the travel company to see if there was any way to cancel or at least get some kind of credit, but the rep told me flat out that the tickets, hotels, and everything else were non-transferable unless I found someone else to use them. I hung up the phone and sat there, staring at the confirmation email for the trip. It felt like a cruel joke. This was supposed to be a celebration of a new chapter in my life, and now it was just another reminder of how completely my world had fallen apart. I thought about eating the cost and just letting the trip go, but the idea of wasting all that money made me sick. That's when it hit me. I could give the trip to someone else. At first, I wasn't sure who I'd even offer it to. Most of my friends either had kids, couldn't take off work, or didn't travel much. Then I thought about my best friend and his wife. Let's call them Mike and Emily. Mike had been my best friend since high school. He was the guy who'd always had my back no matter what. When I was deployed overseas, Mike was the one who checked in on my family and kept them updated. When I got home and felt like I didn't fit in anywhere, he was the one who sat with me on long drives and let me talk through it all. Mike and Emily got married young. Emily was actually Sarah's sister, which complicated things a little, but I trusted her. She was the one who'd sent the message that blew everything up in the first place. She'd caught Sarah cheating at the bachelorette party and gave her a chance to confess to me. Emily didn't have to do that, but she did, and that counted for something. They'd been married for years and had 2 young kids, but they'd never had a real honeymoon. They got married quickly after high school, when Emily found out she was pregnant, and they'd been grinding ever since. Mike worked long hours, Emily stayed home with the kids, and their idea of a vacation was going to the park for a picnic on Mike's day off. They deserved something good, and I figured if anyone should get that trip, it was them. I texted Mike that night. Hey man, weird question. Can you and Emily take off work for 10 days? I've got a trip you might be interested in. Mike called me a few minutes later, completely confused. What kind of trip are we talking about? I explained the situation as briefly as I could. The honeymoon was already paid for, Sarah wasn't going, and I didn't want it to go to waste. I told him I wanted him and Emily to take it. At first, Mike tried to turn me down. Dude, no. You spent all that money. You should go, even if it's just by yourself. I laughed bitterly. Trust me, the last thing I want to do is sit in some romantic honeymoon suite by myself. I'd just spend the whole time feeling sorry for myself. You and Emily should take it. You guys deserve it. Mike got quiet for a second. Are you sure? This is a huge thing to give up, man. I'm sure, I said. It's already paid for. If I don't do something with it, I'm just throwing money in the trash. He told me he'd talk to Emily and call me back. 10 minutes later, they were both on the phone. Emily was crying. Happy tears this time. She kept saying, "Are you serious? This is way too much. We can't take this." But I insisted. Consider it my way of saying thank you for being there for me. You saved me from marrying someone who didn't deserve me. Take the trip and make some good memories for yourselves. Eventually, they agreed. I forwarded them all the details and spent the next few hours on the phone with the hotel and airline to transfer everything into their names. It wasn't easy, but after jumping through a few hoops, it was done. Mike and Emily were officially set to leave for their dream vacation. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little better. For the first time in days, it felt like I'd done something positive with this mess. Mike sent me a text that made me smile. "You're a good man, brother. We'll make the most of this. Promise." But of course, the peace didn't last long. I don't know how Sarah found out about the trip, but when she did, she lost it. The text started rolling in around noon. "How could you do this to me? That's my dream trip. You're a selfish asshole." By the time I got to the third or fourth message, she'd gone from angry to desperate. "Please don't let them go. That trip was supposed to be ours. I can't believe you do this to me." I ignored every single one. I was done with her. Then the messages from her friends started coming in. They called me names, told me I was a jerk, even said I was ruining her life. I didn't respond to any of them. What was the point? Sarah had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate after Sarah found out about the trip. At first, it was just the texts, dozens of them. I ignored every single one, but it was like she couldn't stand not getting a reaction. She went from rage to desperation and back again in a matter of hours. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from her. Her voice sounded frantic, almost unhinged. "Why are you doing this to me? That's my dream vacation. You're punishing me because you're hurt. But this isn't fair. Don't let them take my trip." Her trip. That phrasing stuck with me. The entitlement in her voice almost made me laugh. Like, did she forget what she did? Did she think I was just going to hand her a reward after what she pulled? But it didn't stop there. Sarah must have told her friends her version of the story, probably something that made me sound like the villain, because they started chiming in too. The group chat with Sarah's friends, which I hadn't even thought to leave yet, suddenly lit up. "Wow, can't believe you'd do that to Sarah. You're such a jerk. You're heartless. After everything she's been through, you took that away from her? I hope you rot. No wonder she cheated on you." That one hit me harder than I care to admit. I left the group chat without saying a word and muted my phone. I wasn't about to let a bunch of people who didn't know the whole story get under my skin, but the anger was still simmering inside me. I knew Sarah had twisted things around to make herself look like the victim, and I wasn't about to let that slide. Ikrim. Later that day, Emily called me. So Sarah showed up at my house this morning." My stomach dropped. "What?" "She was banging on the door at like 8 a.m., screaming for me to tell her where the trip is booked, what flights we're on, everything. She's losing her mind." I groaned. "What did you say?" "I didn't open the door," Emily replied. "I just told her through the window that she needed to leave. She started yelling about how I stole the trip from her. Mike called the cops when she wouldn't stop." I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. On one hand, I was glad Emily didn't let Sarah intimidate her. On the other hand, I couldn't believe Sarah was causing this much chaos over a vacation. "Is she gone now?" I asked. "Yeah, the cops showed up and she finally left," Emily said. "But listen, you should know something. She was yelling a lot of stuff while she was outside. Stuff like how she never loved you and how she was just using you. I think the neighbors heard everything. And, our doorbell camera got it all." I went quiet for a moment. "She said that on camera?" "Yep. Emily confirmed. The whole meltdown is recorded. I'm guessing she didn't realize we had a camera pointed at her. She was screaming about how she only stayed with you for stability, and how she thought she'd get a free vacation out of it. Mike said the footage is insane. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew Sarah had been using me, obviously, but to hear her admit it out loud while throwing a tantrum on someone else's front porch, that was something else. Send me the footage, I said. The video came through about an hour later. I watched it in silence. And let me tell you, it was one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. There was Sarah, standing on Emily's front porch in sweats and messy hair, yelling like a crazy person. Tell me where the flights are, Emily. That trip was supposed to be mine. I deserve it. He's a loser. He was lucky I even stayed with him. I was using him anyway. You stole my vacation. It was all there, clear as day. I watched her stomp around, wave her arms, and scream about how she never loved me, and how it was just supposed to be fun, before the cops showed up and calmed her down. And the craziest part? Emily's doorbell camera had crystal clear audio. When I finished watching the video, I didn't know whether to laugh or be angry. Here was Sarah, the woman I'd almost married, completely unhinged on someone's front porch because she couldn't stand the idea of someone else taking her dream trip. It was pathetic. I didn't plan on sharing the video with anyone, but Emily had other ideas. People need to know who she really is, she said. She's out here telling everyone you're the bad guy while throwing tantrums like this? Nope. She ended up posting the footage online. I didn't know about it until I started getting messages later that night. At first, I thought it was just more hate from Sarah's friends, but when I checked my phone, the messages were different. People were apologizing. Hey man, I'm sorry I believed Sarah. I didn't know she was like that. I just saw the video. Holy crap. You dodged a bullet. I feel so bad for texting you earlier. I had no idea. That meltdown, yikes. It turned out that Sarah's meltdown had gone semi-viral. A few local Facebook groups picked up the video, and people were sharing it with captions like, "This is what entitlement looks like," and "Someone needs to check on this woman." Her own family reached out to me the next day. Her mom called and said, "I don't know what's going on with Sarah, but I'm so sorry. We had no idea she was acting like this." I didn't say much. I wasn't about to rehash everything, but I told her the truth. Sarah cheated, and I called off the wedding. That was it. Her mom sighed. We'll talk to her. She needs help. The final straw, though, was Sarah's ex showing up at my house. It was late, around midnight, when I heard someone pounding on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, clearly drunk, swaying a little and mumbling to himself. I opened the door just enough to talk to him. "What the hell do you want?" He pointed a finger at me and slurred, "You ruined her life, man. You think you're a big man now, huh?" I kept the door half closed. "Get off my property." But he didn't. He tried to push his way inside, mumbling about how I stole his girl's trip and how I was gonna pay for it. I shoved him back hard enough to make him stumble. I wasn't about to let some drunk moron break into my house. I called the cops immediately. By the time they showed up, I'd detained him. Not hurt him, just kept him from moving until they could take over. He ended up getting arrested for trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and violating the restraining order I'd already filed against him earlier that week. By the time the dust settled, Sarah had managed to alienate almost everyone in her life. She lost friends, strained her relationship with her family, and now her ex was in legal trouble. Meanwhile, Mike and Emily were getting ready to leave for the dream trip that Sarah thought belonged to her. I won't lie. I felt a small sense of satisfaction knowing karma had finally caught up to her. Point. The days after Sarah's meltdown felt oddly quiet. It was like a storm had finally blown through, and all I was left with was the wreckage to clean up. My phone stopped buzzing with hateful messages, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I could breathe. Sarah had finally gone silent, and I wasn't about to complain. I still had a lot to deal with, though. First, there was the house. I couldn't stand the thought of being surrounded by all these reminders of her. Our photos, her favorite coffee mug, even the stupid little throw blanket she bought for the aesthetic. It was like my entire space was tainted. So I started purging. I spent an entire Saturday going through the house, room by room. Every picture of us? Gone. Her clothes and leftover toiletries in the bathroom. Bagged up and left outside. I even threw out the bedding because honestly, I couldn't look at it without getting flashbacks to the screenshots of her and her ex. A few days later, I got an unexpected call from Sarah's mom. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, and she immediately started apologizing. "I don't know what's wrong with Sarah," she said. "I didn't raise her to act like this. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just said, "It's not your fault. People make their own choices." She sighed. She's been a mess ever since everything happened. She lost her job. Apparently her boss saw the meltdown video online, and most of her friends have distanced themselves. That surprised me. She lost her job? Yeah, her mom admitted. She's staying with a cousin right now, trying to figure things out. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I also didn't feel good about it. I guess I just felt neutral. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Anyway, her mom continued, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything she put you through. You didn't deserve that. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. I appreciate you saying that. It was a short call, but it gave me a weird sense of closure. Sarah's life was falling apart, but it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd walked away, and that was all that mattered. The last piece of the puzzle was myself. I realized I'd spent so much energy dealing with Sarah's drama that I hadn't really thought about what I needed to do to heal. A week later, Mike and Emily came back from their trip. They looked happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen them. Emily hugged me as soon as she saw me and said, "That trip was the best thing that ever happened to us. You have no idea how much we needed it." Mike handed me a little souvenir, a carved wooden figure from one of the local markets, and said, "Consider this good luck for the next chapter." "Next chapter?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, clapping me on the back. "The part where you move on and start building a life you actually want." I looked at the little figure in my hand and smiled. Maybe he was right. That night, I sat alone in my quiet, newly purged house and realized something. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't angry either. I was just free. Sarah was out of my life, her toxicity no longer weighing me down, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could do whatever I wanted. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I needed.